This show talks about books that feature mental health and mental illness topics. There are many books that include this topic, and my hope is that more and more people know about them because they help to decrease the stigma and help people not feel so alone in their struggle. I am your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Joining me on this episode is my guest, Cynthia Lim, who wrote the book Wherever You Are, a Memoir of Love, Marriage, and Brain Injury. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I do like my guests to introduce themselves. So is there anything you'd like to say about like who you are, what you do, or anything else you'd like the listeners to know about you?
Well, I am from Salinas, California. I grew up in Salinas, California, but I've been a resident of Los Angeles for the last, I think, 35 years. So LA is really my home. I retired 2.5 years ago from the Los Angeles Unified School District, where I ran the data department. And I wrote this book after my husband's brain injury, really to help spouses that are in this similar situation, because I found when I was going through this situation that there wasn't anything on the bookshelf for caregivers and how to cope. And so that's my big takeaway. I hope that other caregivers will read this book and realize that they're not all alone in the world.
Definitely. Yeah, and I will say that's what also drew me to your book. When right before I read your book, I was doing a pretty much a Google search, because whenever every month there's like a monthly observance, and like for November it was Family Caregivers Awareness Month. And so I was like scouring Google because I wanted to have like a nice, at least a handful or so to read. And I did spend quite a long time on it, because many of the ones that I saw were caregiving for like an adult, like an older adult aging parent, or like the memoirs. And from that perspective, or more like logistical handbooks on how to like navigate the healthcare and legal system for aging adult parents. So when I came across yours, I got so happy, because I really wanted to find books that were more inclusive to other types of situations and experiences. So when I saw yours and it said spouse and then like unexpected incident, I pretty much had immediately purchased your book and read it. So I got super excited. With that, could you share like a little more about the book and like what it's about?
Sure. So the book covers about a 10-year period. So my husband had a heart attack when he was 47. We were vacationing in Portland, Oregon from our home in Los Angeles, and he went into a coma. So he didn't get enough oxygen. He was deprived of oxygen, so he had a brain injury. So he was in a coma for 2 weeks in Portland. At that point in our lives, we're in our late 40s. We're kind of at the cusp of the height of our careers. He was an attorney. I worked for the school district, and we had 2 teenage sons. And so, we kind of had this very idyllic life, and then it just changed. We got him back to Los Angeles. He woke from his coma, but he had really severe brain injuries. And so the book is really about my journey through that, not so much his, all the clinical details of his injury and rehabilitation, but really what it meant as a spouse to have your partner go through this catastrophic health event and not emerge the same person, because he wasn't ever able to go back to work. His short-term memory was pretty much shot. So he would remember things for maybe like 10 or 15 seconds. And so it was this experience of living with somebody where everything's new and everything's fresh, because he didn't quite remember what had just happened. But the thing is, his long-term memories remain intact. So he was able to remember, when we got married. He remembered when he took the bar exam. And he also was able to understand everything that was said to him, although he couldn't initiate speech about that. So we didn't have those long conversations anymore. But he was aware enough to know me and our kids, even as we grew older and aged. He always recognized us. And so there was this joy in it too, that, the intellectual part of him was gone, but the loving, joy loving side of him was still there. And so it was kind of this discovery of what's still there, what was lost and what was still there. And so, the book is really about how we as a family had to kind of embrace what came back, and we could mourn what was lost, but not get stuck in what was lost. And how do we move forward from that?
Yeah. And out of curiosity, what helped with that process?
I think, well, one thing, it sounds really strange, but work really helped, because I immersed myself in work so that I would have a different identity than just the wife of a brain injured spouse. And so for a while, that really did help to just immerse myself in a different reality. Because I worked with data, and there was a certainty in numbers that I found really comforting. It's like, give me formulas, give me things where there are known entities. So that really helped. And, I come from a big Chinese family, and my husband's family too. He was Jewish, but that family support was essential from my siblings, my sister-in-law, my kids, and our best friends live across the street. So I have these friends that our kids are about the same age, and so they grew up together, and they were a huge support, because they treated Perry, my husband, as if he was the same person. And so that made it so much easier, because people are really uncomfortable around disability.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to treat a person that is disabled or doesn't have the language capacity to express their feelings. And so I found that there were some people that would talk to him like a kindergartner, as if he couldn't quite understand, or, people that raise their face in that kind of falsetto, like they're talking to a child. And that wasn't so comfortable. What I really appreciated is people that just treated him like he was pre-brain injury, and he was able to follow all those conversations. He just couldn't respond, very quickly to them.
Yeah, that's so wonderful that you had a great support, through all that. And going back to what you said about even working, like I've heard that before, and it very much makes sense, especially when there's like all these changes, or some uncertainty or some adjustments. Sometimes like having something that is like routine, even if it's just like getting up and going to work, and you get in the rhythm of that and you know what to expect, can be so helpful as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Until at the very end, it got a little too stressful, because what happened at work is I assumed more and more responsibility and leadership, and towards the end, it was like, oh, what, work's getting to be too stressful. I think it's time to retire. So I retired like 2.5 years ago.
Nice, nice. Yeah. And so for the book, who is the book really intended for? Like when you thought about writing it, and like as you were writing it, and then once it was out, did you have anyone in particular in mind that like you were really like, I really hope these particular groups or people read the book, or maybe it'd be great if these ones did?
Yeah, I think initially it was intended for people like me that were in a similar situation, the spouse of somebody that's brain injured or disabled, that doesn't have that happy ending, that they don't have this miraculous recovery, and they go back to work and everything's the way it was pre-brain injury or pre-disability. So I envisioned that this would be helpful for spouses that feel alone and isolated, because it really is alone and isolating. I mean, when this happened, you realize your social circle just shrinks, because people, like acquaintances, are just really uncomfortable with the whole disability idea. And so you realize who are like the friends that are able to stick with you through it. And it really is a lonely experience. I mean, I found a support group of women that we all had brain injured spouses, and so that was really helpful too, just to have a community where you could go and you can complain and not feel guilty for feeling bad or exasperated, for being a caregiver. So that was one audience. And the other audience, as I was writing it, because I had a lot of anger in the earlier drafts about the medical community and how they treated us and just their attitudes. And I didn't include a lot of that in the book because it was really I wanted to be more about me and my personal journey. But I wanted people in the medical community, the doctors, the therapists, to really know that their words matter and the way that you say them really matter. Because I had so many encounters where doctors were basically saying, gee, I'm really sorry. Here's your disabled husband, you deal with it. We don't know what else there is to do. And so I was really left on my own trying to find resources for brain injured adults, and especially for somebody in their late 40s, early 50s, because a lot of the services out there, like you said earlier, are geared towards older adults and not so much, younger people with brain injuries. So it was almost a full-time job just to scour the community to figure out what is out there. I mean, like what can I do other than sit in front of a TV with a caregiver while I work all day, right? So, and I didn't really get a whole lot of help from the medical community.
And that breaks my heart. Like, that's really unfortunate. And it sounds super disappointing, like, especially since they would have access to resources or, like something, that they could like provide. And it sounds like you were just like left to yourself to figure it out. And this was a while ago, right, too? So
yeah, this happened in 2003. And my husband passed away in 2018, sadly, before the book came out. But so it was a 15-year journey with disability. And I have to say, I think that things are improving because towards the very end, maybe like in 2015, around then, I changed my medical group, or my medical group changed, or whatever. Anyway, and I met this neurologist it was such a breath of fresh air. I mean, the first thing she asked me was, how could I help you? And I thought, that is so huge. In this 15-year journey that we've had, no one has asked me, how can I help you? It's always, what's wrong with him, or, what do we need to do with him? But nothing about, you as a caregiver, as a spouse, what can I do to help you? And it was such a huge thing. And, she referred me to like these great rehabilitation doctors. There really wasn't anything else, that I didn't already know that we could do with him, because by then I'd found this great resource at Santa Monica College that deals with brain injuries. I found this wonderful speech therapist that worked with him every week. So, all these resources that I found were just fabulous. But just the fact that somebody listened and said, hey, why don't you go see this rehabilitation doctor? Why don't, let's just take an inventory to see what else could help, which was, it was a little late in the game, but at least it was changing. So I kind of feel like I think doctors are changing in terms of their bedside manner and, their willingness to help families.
Well, I'm glad you had that experience in the end, although, it's amazing because, yeah, medical terminology, probably going to a list of things to do, but it sounds like in some ways just the humanness and like being with like a fellow human, like in their struggle, saying like, how are you? Is there anything you need? Like, just like that kind of basic, thing is like so crucial, especially for this. So,
I mean, I think, the other big thing too is just in the last couple of years when I've gone for my annual physical exams, there's a mental health questionnaire that, doctors have never done that before, right? And I think that's such a good thing that, there's just this checking in with people so that if you were feeling that way, like there's actually an avenue for you to talk about that where, in my lifetime, I've never had that, right? Where you go to your physical doctor and they're asking you to take a mental health screening, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, we've weaved our way into the to the doctor's office, broke through those red tape in a way. So that's great. You're right in that it is coming along, but it does sound like, especially for some specialty areas, or even just at the outset, how it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
In that beginning part, I remember when I read your book, and I mean, the fact that this occurred when you were on vacation, you weren't even anywhere near here, and then, to be at the hospital. I just can't even imagine like how like disorienting, that much must be. And even sometimes then, like, it can be hard, to just think about some of like the basic stuff or like, wait, what's happening, so someone who's, other medical staff that are really able to be attuned to that and like,
Mm-hmm.
respond to that, would be so powerful. So.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a degree in social work. I have my master's and my doctorate in social work, and so that's really kind of my foundational knowledge, right? And although I never went into therapy, I was more in the research and administration side. But when that happened in Portland, at that moment of crisis, there was this social worker, and I thought, oh, finally a social worker. And I found it a really kind of empty exercise because here I was like in complete shock. I'm in this room in the ICU unit, and this social worker is saying, what do you need? And I was at my wit's end. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. I'm not home. I'm in this strange place. I'm worried about my kids, all this stuff. And all she did was she gave me a list of hotels. And I was like, and afterwards I was like, that's it? Like,
Oh
that's all my profession has to offer me is a list of hotels?
my gosh. Well, shifting gears a little bit, what was your experience with like the grief process, or like when did that start?
Do you mean after he died in 2018 or?
It had started after, because it's interesting because I've heard like with sometimes there's like, it's interesting how it's like different. Sometimes it is like after the person has died, but sometimes it's like before, or like kind of just that process starts before. But I don't know for you, and if you feel comfortable talking about that, what that was like for you.
It was like grieving twice. So the first time after his brain injury, it was grieving for the person that he used to be pre-brain injury. And I miss that still, even now that he's gone. But that was really hard because I think there's a point in the book where I write that I felt like a widow, but he was still alive. So there's this person that looks like the person you used to know, but a lot of his memories and his speech, because he talked all the time, and he used to have these great conversations. And that's what I really, really missed after his brain injury, is just that ability to have those deep conversations with him. And I think for my kids too, we all mourned the loss of who he was, because he was a guy who loved to travel and backpack, and he was very adventurous. And, and after the brain injury, it was like we were pretty much taking care of him and, taking him to Dodger games and doing these things and looking after him the way he used to look after us. So that was really hard. And I think we didn't want to get stuck in just mourning what was. We kind of learned to just say, okay, let's just be grateful for what has come back and what he is now. So I think that's what really helped us move forward with that. But then after he died, it was like grieving both all over again. Like you miss the person he was before, and you miss the person he was after, So Yeah, the finality of death is a kind of grief that's like no other.
Yeah. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, during that time, weren't you also moving? There was,
Moving?
yeah,
Oh, we remodeled our house.
remodel.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
have this small house in Los Angeles. And we remodeled it after the kids went to college. We remodeled it so that it would be more handicap friendly. Like I put in, a bigger walk-in shower and that sort of thing. So we treated it like a vacation, and we moved to an apartment near the water in the marina. So it was a nice little interlude. And the remodeled house was much easier in terms of caregiving. So yeah, it was a little disorienting though. I think it was more disorienting for me than it was for him. To like pack up your house and move somewhere else. And
As far as the caregiving, and I remember like when I read the book too, it was very much, I think, refreshing in a way, because there's a lot of books out there. I read like a ton of books, but but I felt like there was a completeness, or like very much a completeness with the experience of caregiving, and I think not a lot of people talk about, the parts that are mainly the parts that like maybe not so great as well. Would you be open to like sharing your experience with like the caregiving, even the parts that, and I've heard this before too, sometimes people kind of hold back and like talk about, even if it's like the awfulness or whatever it may be.
yeah, I think it's so important to talk about, even though it is such a horrible experience. I mean, he was incontinent, so we had to deal with that. And when you're out in public, you have to like look for bathrooms that you can accompany your husband in, and that's changed a lot too. Because at the very beginning, it's like it was only men's restrooms, women's restrooms, and now there's like family restrooms and gender, not gender specific restrooms, which is a wonderful thing. But it was really, really hard in the earlier days, just that simple thing of like whenever you traveled, like I had to help them in the bathroom, and you had to endure like all these stares from people of taking them to the bathroom. And I think though for caregivers it's so important to acknowledge those moments and know that they are exasperating. Or there were times where he would wake up in the middle of the night, and I'd have to get up in the morning and go to work, and it was really, really frustrating. Like, how do you preserve yourself? How do you get that few hours of sleep that you need so that you could get up and do this again the next day? And acknowledge that it's really frustrating and you do get angry, and it's okay to get angry. So one of the great organizations I found was this Well Spouse Association, and it's an organization for spouses that are caregiving, and it's former and current caregivers. I did a keynote at one of their conferences, and it was such a refreshing experience to be in a room where everybody has had the exact same experience as you have. So I think that's the power of networks and support groups, and finding those people that have been through those exact same situations and know it's okay to talk about the awfulness of it.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that resource too. Well Spouse. I will add that on the website. Is there anything I didn't ask that you'd want to share or like talk about?
No, I think you were pretty thorough in your questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And I really I was so happy when you like agreed to be on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on. I get like fangirl too when I have when I have authors on. I get super excited. And also just like with your book, and being on this podcast, being really vulnerable and open, and
Yeah.
and and my whole mission, behind this podcast is so that, people don't feel so alone, in their struggle. And I think your book, and definitely you being here on this podcast talking about that, really, really helps with that mission, because I can't even imagine how many caregivers out there and caregivers of spouses out there, that would benefit, from listening to this, reading your book, and then also some medical professionals as well.
Yeah.
Little tips here, but I thank you very, very, very much. And I think your book is great and it's super helpful. I know, as far as your book on where to purchase it, I know I've seen it on Amazon, seen it on bookshop.org. Is there anywhere else?
Basically Amazon and Bookshop, but you could always ask your local independent bookstore and they can order it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I like to support, local independent bookshops.
Yeah, especially right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I will post that. And then if our listeners are interested in finding more about you, are you okay with me sharing your website?
Yes.
Yeah, it's cynthialimwriting.com. And I'll also post that website on the podcast website, booksbetweensessions.com. So thank you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully this was informative or helpful. If you think this episode may be helpful to others that you know, be sure to share this episode with them. Resources on this episode can be found at the podcast website, booksbetweensessions.com. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a rating. If you would like to stay up to date, please subscribe to this podcast and follow the podcast Instagram, Books Between Sessions. I post multiple videos and lives every month. So be sure to follow our Instagram so you can see extra content. And if you have a book suggestion, books you would like discussed on this podcast, or if you're an author who has written a book that includes mental health or mental illness topics and would like to be a guest on the podcast, please send us a message on the contact page of the podcast website, booksbetweensessions.com. Also, this podcast is not psychotherapy or counseling. If you need to speak with a professional, you should find one local to you and contact them directly. If this is an emergency, please call your local emergency number or go to your nearest emergency department.